afternoon, everybody. This is Coach Kerr with the Elvis Cully Fight Team. I'm talking to you from the Fight House podcast today. I'll be joined by Doug Raven from Eastside Combatives. He's from Washington. I had the good fortune to actually meet him this year at Dr. Kelly Warden's Water and Steel. And yeah, I'm going to bring him on, do our introduction, and yeah, we'll just come hang out. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, good. How are you?
Doing well. We had a little conversation beforehand, but let's backtrack and introduce you to our community. And yeah, let's go. Tell us a story.
All right. Well, I've been in and around martial arts for about 40 years. I was inspired by Bruce Lee on the big screen, like so many of my generation, and said, hey, I want to do something like that. And watching Enter the Dragon multiple times. I was living in a small town in Moncton, New Brunswick. I'm Canadian.
Okay.
And some martial arts around then. This is the late 70s, early 80s. So most of it was karate and taekwondo.
Yeah.
And just never really got into it when I was living at home. But I moved to Calgary, Alberta, and was going to school out there, college, and found a kung fu school. And I said, hey, that's even what Bruce does. So I joined this Tiger Claw Kung Fu school, and it was a really interesting system, which I still practice some of it today. And I'm still in touch with my first teacher from 40 years ago, Murray Parsons.
Oh, wow.
And we became very good friends. And as I was progressing through the ranks and learning things, I became an instructor and helped him out at the school. And we used to double date and everything. So, it was kind of cool.
Awesome.
But the one thing that was really interesting there was it was a combination that I don't see very often in martial arts. It was 2 external Kung Fu styles and 2 internal.
Okay.
So it was Wing Chun for interception, close-in fighting, more of the Bruce Lee type of stuff with the Jeet Kune Do and everything, intercepting fists and all of that. And then Hung Gar, which taught us low, powerful, strong stances and long striking. And so those were the 2 external styles. And then we also did Tai Chi and Bagua and implemented Bagua with the external. And then Tai Chi was kind of a separate class. Okay. And I learned the Yang style long form, which if anyone knows Tai Chi, they'll understand what that means. But basically a really long form with 100 and some movements in it, 108. It takes a lot of memorization, but teaches you a tremendous amount about movement and body mechanics, dynamics, and things like that. So I think I was really fortunate to have that internal art component in my martial arts right from the beginning, and it's helped guide me, over the whole 40 years of what I do and how I do it.
Wow. So, I mean, it's interesting because this podcast, both Girl Brian and I come from a pretty solid FMA background, and we end up being very FMA centric. But I mean, there's a lot of things people forget about in American history, like the Kung Fu Revolution, thanks to Bruce Lee, where Kung Fu, Karate, and Taekwondo really ruled the U.S. from like 1970 to mid 2000s. Like for me, I actually started in Shorty Foot Kung Fu with my father, plus a couple other things. And then later, I got exposed to Tai Chi Chuan as well about 10 years ago. So it's fun how things come full circle. And of course, like everybody else, I mean, I did Taekwondo as a kid, competed in that. So, and found my way to FMA Combatives formally and stuck with that later in life. It is really interesting because of regionality and availability, how it kind of dictates what you're going to do.
Yeah, and time frame. If you look at martial arts in the United States, we had boxing, we had wrestling, and that was really it until post-World War II.
Yep.
And then the servicemen brought karate from Japan after the occupation, and so in the 50s, karate started coming in. Then post Korea, Taekwondo was brought back from Korea.
Yep.
And so the evolution there is partly due to 2 major wars, and then servicemen coming back from the Far East, bringing those martial arts with them, and then watching these arts as they were on top. They do generations, kind of like we as humans do. And the generation for being on top is about 20 to 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. BJJ is actually at the end of that cycle, which is interesting.
Exactly. So that brings up my question of, okay, there was karate, there was taekwondo, then Bruce brought, kung fu in the 70s, and that had a good, peak for 20 years. Then in 92, 93, UFC went televised, so that brought in BJJ and more, Muay Thai. And so those have been going for 20, 25 years now on the top. So what's next?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one would argue, this is a little bit of bias, is FMA, because FMA in the West is really been around. It's been around the entire time, but it hasn't gotten its due to lack of like public acceptance because it's weapon-based system. On top of all that, there's some of the weird cultural, indigenous, political conflict because you got 7,000 islands. The other one too is like, it's not popularized in media of saying like, we don't have a figure like Bruce Lee to say this is Chinese martial arts. This is Americanized Chinese martial arts. We don't have that public figure in the public zeitgeist to actually address like that's FMA. However, I mean, you see it everywhere. Everything from like Black Widow from the Marvel universe. You see it from the Hunted with Tommy Lee Jones. You see it in all of the Batmans. You see it. Let's see what else where you see it. You see it with Ron Balicki and Diana Inosanto, of course, and let alone the demo team attached to the Inosanto lineage. But there isn't like, this is an FMA character.
Right.
Here's an FMA. Yeah.
One of my favorite, Robert McCall. Look at the way he uses impact and edged weapons and his knife stuff and everything. Denzel in those fight scenes in The Equalizer. It's used in almost every movie, but people just don't know what it is.
Yeah, because like the Bourne Identity series, because it's the Jeff Yamada connection. I mean, you see it all there. There's Panuntuken, however you can pronounce it and argue over it, but you see it there. But there's no like, this is FMA. Actually, a great example is the Denis Villeneuve's movie, a rendition of Dune, because the fight choreographer very specifically said, for House Atreides, we're going to use Balintawak. And you can see the Balintawak blocking counter sets in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's I've known the story of and not personally, but known Dan Inosanto for 40 years now too, through social media, his videos, his teaching and everything. And actually I did FMA for a couple of years in Toronto. So if we go back to my history a little bit leading up to the FMA, so I did my Kung Fu, joined the Canadian Army, didn't do martial arts for a while, but learned some military stuff, and then went into law enforcement. And in law enforcement at the time, so we're talking late 80s, early 90s, it was Japanese jiu-jitsu. We were doing takedowns, limb control, small joint manipulation, arm bars, getting them into cuffing position for controlling of combative and uncooperative and combative subjects. And so Japanese jiu-jitsu was big in that realm. So I started doing Japanese jiu-jitsu with a lot of officers who then got me into defensive tactics. I became a defensive tactics trainer, instructor, and range officer and all of that when I was in law enforcement. And while I was there too, I lived in downtown Toronto along the lakeshore, which was an area where a lot of Filipinos lived. Yeah. And so I learned some Sarada from Rudy Cosico, who learned from his father, who learned from his grandfather in the Philippines. And we were training at a little community center in off King Street in downtown Toronto. Nice. And Rudy was another, he was an inspiration. I went to they had a martial arts demo at Community Days. And Rudy's there with some of his students, and, they start hitting sticks, and I'm like, damn, what's this? And Rudy flies up one side and down the other side of one of his students and stuff, hits him about 30 times in 2.5 seconds. And I'm like, I want to learn that.
Right.
So I, every Sunday afternoon for a few hours, I went over to the community center and did FMA with these guys. And they were doing full contact fighting, going down to Boston and New York and stuff on the East Coast. And so we'd put on the hockey helmets and the lacrosse gloves and padded outfits and stuff and beat the shit out of each other.
Did you ever get involved with the Dog Brothers? Because we got Growling Dog Rene Kokolo on here, and to give credit to it, yes, the Dog Brothers is definitely something that has given FMA in America such a huge platform for people to associate with. But like to our point previously, I would love to see an FMA character, movie, television character. So, but yeah, did you get ever involved in Dog Brothers in the past?
No, I know who they are. I know a couple of the names. I've seen some video, but not directly. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so going back a little bit, so you spent some time in the Canadian Army. Do you want to speak a little bit to it? Because a part of this podcast, we also like to feature a lot of veterans, because both Brian and I are both veterans. I'm an Army veteran and he's an Air Force veteran. So for one, thank you for your service. And two, what did you do in the military? And better yet, what brought you to it?
Well, so back to Calgary again, when I started my martial arts career, they're all jerks except me.
He's talking about the Dog Brothers.
The Dog Brothers. All right. That's great. As long as they still get along, you know.
I mean, bonding through violence. Yes.
So I was in Calgary, started my martial arts career there at 19 years old, went to college there, and I was looking for something that I could do, get a college degree, and that was immediately usable, and liked biology and chemistry and the body. I was an athlete since I was 12. I was a competitive swimmer up to national level before my martial arts career started.
Okay.
And so I was looking at physical therapy, trainer, physical training, stuff like that. And I decided that nursing was the most viable, most versatile career that would give me the options, so many more options than anything, including being able to fly in helicopters or, get a PhD and be an administrator in a hospital and all that. So I took my nursing degree at Mount Royal University in Calgary. And so I joined the military as a nurse. So I was a direct entry officer, left basic officer training as a first lieutenant, and was posted to CFB Stadacona, which is a naval base in Halifax. So if you're in the medical corps, you are assigned a uniform. So I was Army uniform, but you can be assigned to any force base.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you can I could have gone to an Army base, an Air Force base, or a Navy base. And so I was walking around a naval base in Greens,
that's fun.
As a lieutenant. And so I did that for 2 years, Reg Force, and then transitioned to reserve for 5. And that's when I went into law enforcement with Metro Toronto. And so this is all back 1985 to 1988. And so so when we bring that into the martial arts, that's the Kung Fu into the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, the DT and everything, and my introduction to the FMA in the early 90s in downtown Toronto. So now we're like 92, 93, with me still being a cop in Toronto. So that's,
Oh, wow. So we were talking about this earlier. There's a lot of martial artists that come at this from a hobby standpoint. I'm going to butcher where this comes from, but the analogy often is there's the 80, the 10, the 9, and the 1. 80% are the people that are just there to participate. There's the 10% who really shouldn't be there whatsoever. Then you got the 9% who are the soldiers, the operators. People are actually going to do this. And then you got the 1% who are your champions, your warriors, the people who are going to lead you and bring you back home. And so a lot of martial arts, especially a lot of hobbyists, which are the basis of the martial arts community, they're that 80%. But when people go into the specific fields like military and law enforcement and executive protection, they are definitely that 9 and the 1%. And it's, again, going back to being a professional martial artist or professional combatives combat instructor. It's an interesting field that a lot of people don't ever get that experience because it's just not what they do professionally or want to do professionally. And so there's a different mindset that comes about when people professionally use martial arts and turn into combatives versus professional martial arts like combat sports athletes or combat sports trainers. There's like, when you dive over to that side of military, law enforcement, and executive protection, it's a different mindset. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I always broke it down into, there's 3 types of people in general. You have fighters, okay? You have martial artists. They're like traditions, katas, style based. They want to get their rank and their belts and everything, and they look at it as an artistic form of physical presentation, you know, that type of thing. And then you have warriors.
Yep.
Some of the fighters become warriors.
Yep.
But it's usually a different mindset, and they're into it for competition and you know, other reasons. The warriors do it, to me, not so much for ourselves, but for others. So you go into the military, you go into law enforcement, you go into service as an executive protection agent or a security officer, you know, in protection services, things like that. So it's a different mentality, and the martial artist who's doing it as a hobby is very different.
Yes.
There's different goals, and one of the topics we might get into is this goal-oriented, student-based, you know, curriculum presentation and understanding what the students' goals are, because that makes a huge difference in how they should be training. And so for me personally, I always wanted to train. I trained in martial arts for me at the beginning for personal development. I've only ever been in 3 competitions in martial arts. I did kata in one.
Yep.
I did a self-defense demo in another, and I fought in one.
That's already ahead of the curve, because there's a lot of people who just, the trolls behind the keyboard that have yet to step in yet to be the man in the arena. Yeah,
but martial arts to me wasn't about competition. I competed as a swimmer, like I mentioned, for 8 years of my life to national level, and I had no interest in competing anymore. So martial arts was about developing me as a human being, and then it became me using it as a profession. And so that's why I became a DT instructor too. So when you're using it as a profession, it's not about, can I beat this guy on the mat? Can I tap him out? Can I, you know, kick this guy's ass in the ring or anything? It's, can I survive when this person might be trying to kill me or is trying to kill me? And so the mentality of the training needs to be very different, and how the training is incorporated and done needs to be very different as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So
going back to, sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
I look at the hobbyist martial arts, and I wrote down a couple of things that maybe I wanted to touch on. It's, you know, most hobbyist martial artists train in a sterile environment.
Yes.
With very little threat, with not too many variables, and with very specific rules to make sure that no one gets injured. And they think they're kick-ass because they can do that.
Yeah.
You know, and there's agreements. Usually there's no weapons involved unless we're talking about FMA. There's no multiple opponents involved unless we're talking about very specific training scenarios. And usually there's no scenario, so there's no decision making. So you have guys who are really good at a set skill. They're good at set skill set, but they don't have the mental aspects of decision making and survival if they're taking outside of that sterile training environment.
Yep. Context, training context, and combative context. A lot of people have a hard time differentiating the two, because you get set in what you do. Your preferences are based upon practices.
Yes. And so, for instance, I'm a white belt in BJJ, and I go and train at a school here in Bellevue at Belton's school, Warrior Strength. So yeah, most of you guys know Belton.
Yeah.
and Sean's my instructor. So we were talking the other day, it was just Sean and I in class, and we were talking about a lot of this and context and training and how to take your BJJ from sport BJJ on the mat into a context in law enforcement or on the street. Because Sean, it looks like he may be going to the academy to be a deputy.
Oh, nice.
And so he's trying to transition his mind too, of years of kind of sport training and controlled environment training to, okay, well, what happens on the street if this guy goes for my gun? What happens if he pulls a knife? How am I going to use my high level of skill in a very different environment with a different threat level and in a different context? And so they said, okay, well, let's try something here. I said, I'm going to have a knife in my hand. And we started in a position, we were both lying on our backs on the ground, his feet at my head. You know, we both fell down. And as we were falling, I pulled my knife, but you didn't see it. And I said, go. Well, Sean immediately got me pinned to the ground in a good side mount position with control of my head and my outside arm, but he didn't have control of my inside arm. So I stabbed him about 10 times. And then we're like, that's context. That's adding the weapon. That's looking for alternate threats, taking it outside of your normal training environment. And then I said, lie down again. And I showed him my version of doing it, where my first move was pinning the inside arm before I got into side mount with my leg. And it's like, oh yeah, because you don't know what's in that hand if you can't see it yet. And you're moving into a grappling distance without controlling the two primary limbs. And so on the street, you can't do that.
No.
You know, you got to know what's there.
Especially if you're kitted up, because your kit, I'm talking about your law enforcement setup, your military setup. There is so much accoutrement on you that you lose that sensitivity because you have so much crap unaware. So that the context of a belt and gi or your slick suit and just your Spanx and as the 10th Planet guys go about it, you have a lot of tactile sensitivity because there's nothing impeding that. But when you're kitted out, it's hard to feel those things. It's hard to have understanding of space and management, because my introduction to BJJ came later in life. It came when I was in the Army and when I was going through the Combatives program. And one of the things that I really questioned and continue to question thereafter is we're trying to achieve dominance in mount while we're wearing full plate carrier with crap on, plus a rifle, plus all this other stuff. And it's very difficult, and trying to roll is very difficult. So, and this is where when I was training and teaching combatives, I steered away often from like this passing guard training methodology of level 1 combatives, and contextualize it, because I had a guy in his role play of a insurgent, so basically nothing, and the guy in full kit, and come to find out the guy in full kit had a lot of problems because that sensitivity issue and just the bulk and problem set. So
just being able to move. I mean, my kit was only 17 pounds. What was yours? 40?
Something like that. If you put 210 rounds plus plates plus all the other Batman belt accoutrement.
Exactly. Mine was 17, most of it around my waist because we didn't wear vests back then. So we just had internal vests, and then most of the gear was on your belt. And still then, you know, being able to roll and move and rolling over your gun, which is digging into your hip on the ground, or having your magazines fall out of your mag pouch. So you go to, you know, you get into a shootout after you've just been grappling with this guy, and you reach for, and your magazine pouch is empty. You know, I mean, just all these things. But I saw a quick flash of a comment there, said sounds like firearms, and it's like, yes, it's exactly what happens with firearms training. It's you go into a sterile range in a little booth where you can't even draw from your holster in many ranges, with a piece of paper, and you shoot it, and then you think you're good in a gunfight. You know, or you think that you can draw your gun when the guy's pressing you against the wall and choking you. You know, and it's like, yeah, guys, probably not going to happen very well. You know, maybe you get lucky, but if you can't fight to create the distance, And then even then, are you going to go to your sidearm when he's still within reaching distance, or are you going to leave it secured in your holster and use other stuff?
Because a lot of people have this idea, because the flat range is in Instagram and the way that it's portrayed with speed shooting in 3-gun is that you have the opportunity to engage at range and you have that space and that time to engage at distance. However, the fight, as they said, happens within 10 feet, but reality, the fight is immediate in your face, and you have to create that space, like you said, to engage that weapon and operate safely. And so a lot of the training is at distance or within medium range, when the fact is a lot of training and experience comes at like touch range, press range, when you have to create space to get access to that weapon or create space to minimize access to that weapon. And there's a lot of people just don't train that way because they just don't think that way.
There's a couple of guys out there I know on YouTube, and they have their sidearm and their knife. And they'll have knife available left hand, sidearm available right hand. And one of the ways they create distance is first is the shove, but the shove is coming as they're drawing their knife. And then they're going multiple stabs, like with a reverse grip, to create the distance, and then go into the firearm as they bring the knife back in. And now they're shooting because now they've got 6 feet of space.
I like that methodology.
So it's using your close weapon and within grappling hand's reach, which is your blade, to create some distance for your projectile weapon where they're now out of hand's reach, but you can now shoot them without having them just grab your gun, and being able to transition and then transition back in if he rushes you, because you might put 6 rounds center of mass and he's still going for a few minutes.
9mm goes through stuff, so does 40 cal, and if he's over 200 pounds,
it's not stopping him, not right away.
No.
So being able to go through those transitions and back and forth. If we talk about it in combative, terms, escalating, de-escalating, escalating, de-escalating, making different choices, pulling a different weapon, creating distance, de-escalating, escalating, and going through that. And I don't see martial artists doing any of that.
No, because context. A lot of his context.
And
which is fine. And I'm not one to disparage martial artists because I am one. And we're the phase that I'm at now, because I went from training in the backyard with my father, my uncles, my grandfather, doing the traditional thing, going up to competition, then going to the military, doing professionally, coaching, almost fighting professionally, coaching professionally, training agencies professionally. And now, because all that's done and over with, my professional phase, I've come back to the martial artist in the backyard with my brothers and my son. So it's like that cycle of why we fight is continuous, and it's the why changes in time, the why changes in context, and it is okay. And a lot of people get so fixated on that window of efficacy, that combative combat operator phase, but that time period is so small, and it gets smaller even more because of injury, because of circumstance. Because like my competitive phase was taken away from me due to injuries, one of which is the things I'm dealing with TBI and CTE. I had to stop fighting because my brain's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, and I I don't want anyone that's listening to mistaken that I'm down talking martial arts training at all. I'm not, because I'm a martial artist as well. And for me at this stage in my life, that's my primary focus as well. It's just looking at bringing into your martial arts training some of these scenarios and decision-making processes so that your martial arts gets even better and it's more practically usable if you ever have to use it in self-defense. That's my purpose of bringing it up. And just saying, well, can you add this to your training platform?
So talking about self-defense and martial arts, we were talking before we went live about the context of your student base comparatively to some others, because for like my case, dealing with the homeless, gangbanger, inner city nonsense and the old fight gym mentality, that has been the scope of my reality for a long time, and especially like the adverse at-risk youth community. So there's that scope, but there's also the other side, based upon regionality economic and social status, and it's a different mentality and different reasons why. Can you speak a little bit to that as well?
So I've had schools in Toronto, mixed bag of people. I taught in Santa Fe, New Mexico for just 17 years. Again, kind of a mixed bag of people. Right now, I have a school in a smaller town. It's upper middle class, a lot of tech parents with lots of money. So the kids who are coming to me to learn martial arts aren't coming for self-defense.
Yeah.
Not where they live. They're not coming because they're screwed up in some way and want to fight people. They're coming because they don't like team sports, and their parents want them to get fit and to have fun and to be physical and not sit in front of the Xbox for hours and hours every day. So my kids class is a bunch of, kids who come for enjoyment.
Yeah.
And so I teach them enjoyment martial arts.
Yeah.
We do a lot of attribute development, speed, agility, catching, bouncing tennis balls in relay races.
Creative play. Creative
play. They get the pads out and now they can hit something and try to put some force behind it. I teach them forms and I teach them some basic drills. So there's, the kids, we wear t-shirts, they get belts. I use belts in the kids class, but not the adult class. And so they also have something to look forward to. They also have something to study and practice at home before they come for a grading, which we just had last Thursday.
Nice.
But at the same time, my gradings are true gradings, which I see in some martial arts have degraded, I guess. They don't get the stripe if they don't earn it. I don't test just the people who are going to make it. I test everyone, and sometimes they're disappointed because you have to deal with disappointment in life. I've had kids there for 2 years who just now earned their yellow belt, instead of like already having like some, their sixth one or something in some color, pink or purple or gray or whatever. So I try to keep some of that old idea in there too, like you will earn what you work for.
Yep.
And when you achieve it, it means something to you. So I have that in there, along with the creative play and the skill development and learning about yourself. And so that's kind of my approach to martial arts in a really nice, safe, middle upper class, neighborhood.
And that's beautiful because honestly, again, going back to that analogy we were using before about the 80% is that of which who are going to propel martial arts into the future because it comes from a basis of love. It doesn't come from a basis of need because violence is the currency and the identity structure attached to it. It is, I'm a martial artist because I love this. I'm a martial artist because this makes me feel better. I'm a martial artist because it's beautiful, versus I have to do this because it's life. I have to do this because this is how I feed myself. I have to do this because this is how I defend myself. And it's a different mentality. Both are equally important. Both are equally beautiful, have some of their own issues. But again, the martial artist is that beauty that pushes us forward and keeps martial arts from becoming obscure and dying.
Yes. Yeah. I was at a birthday party last night and a young gentleman started. So Mikado, no, I do not know him.
Okay.
Yeah. No. So I was at a birthday party last evening and a young gentleman started talking to him. I met him once or twice, but we'd never really talked. And he grew up in Turkmenistan, over in the former Soviet Union. And as a kid, they were taught how to fight, to street fight. It was survival. And his uncle would take him to a village to fight over in the next village against kids their age. And that was just something that they did as young men, was they would go from village to village, not going over and starting fights, but going over for the purpose of having, competitions.
skills development and
other
experience.
in other villages with real fights in the middle of the street in town, kind of thing, you know. And so we were talking last night about how that developed him. He says, I don't have fear. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm confident. I try all kinds of things. And this young man really impressed me last night. He tries everything.
Yeah.
He went to ballet class last week. He's come to my girlfriend's painting class. He races go-karts. He tried surfing. He, you know, like, I mean, he just has this mindset. And I think a lot of it was developed at that stage of him overcoming any fears, of any questions of his own personal abilities. And so, yeah. And, you know, he's impressive. It was really, you know, it was a really great conversation. And he was really interested in learning more about what I had to say about martial arts and stuff too. He's doing Muay Thai and BJJ right now at one of the local gyms.
Okay.
And so we talked a lot about martial arts and some of what we're talking about now.
It's a beautiful thing when a person can get to the point in their life and their stage in development where they can give themselves the permission to play, the permission to find joy and do the things that make themselves happy. Because we're so constrained as a society, especially here in the West, that we're stuck in these little boxes of you have to be this because it's expected of you. You are required to be that because you look like that. And as much as we try to be a free and open society that is diverse, we get so pigeonholed in these little niches of you must be this. Like a consistent discussion that I have is people can constitute as toxic masculinity, but reality is we're talking about identity for men, because for the longest time the currency of men is violence, our capability of violence, and therefore we go into professions and where violence is the currency, the reward system, and the thing that we attach our identity to, when that's so limiting, and it's sad. And this is where finding something that gives you the permission of that you can be more, you're more than just, and finding that peace thereafter, that's a beautiful phase. Having somebody gone through the forge of fighting, the forge of violence, and coming out the other end and saying, hey, I have found peace because I have gone through purpose and pain. So congrats on your student and for finding that joy.
Yeah. It was really a good conversation. And I'm fortunate enough to recognize that within myself. You know, my purpose of martial arts for me now at this stage in my life is personal development, and just being happy, being healthy, being resilient, and being able to continue to move.
Movement is life. Yes.
I over the years, I've had friends when we were going through our 40s and our 50s, and they'd had 2 surgeries and 2 shoulders and a knee and you know, some of the vertebrae fused and stuff like that. I've had nothing.
Nice.
I have full movement of my entire original human body.
Congratulations. I don't have that. I voided the warranty a long time ago.
Well, and you know, part of it was, you know, I didn't go into a combat military thing. So I know a lot of young people have that, which is, you know, bless them and everything. And you, so I was fortunate to have been able to not have that life experience, but through my martial arts experience training, I always had this inherent understanding of what my limits were too.
Yeah.
And so I trained hard. I worked hard. I, you know, made hundreds of arrests of violent subjects in law enforcement, and, you know, using tactics and strategies and everything was always to avoid able to avoid injury.
Yeah, because you have to go to work the next day. You have to go home.
Yeah, and I see a lot of guys, and it's like, yeah, man, train hard, but don't hurt yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it's not worth it, because you blow your knee out, or you know, you need your rotator cuff done. You're out for 3 to 6 months now, and you have to readapt and do some other things. And so if you're lucky enough to take care of yourself early, like, yeah, Brandy's here. Hi, Brandy. You have to take care of your body at all stages, no matter what stage you're at, whether you're still a teenager or whether you're, an old man like me. And it's like, so I've softened a lot. And, I'll go enroll in class and I'll just say, hey, 50%. And if you tap me out, I don't care. I'll tap as fast as I can to prevent something being stretched where it doesn't need to be stretched.
Because I like my shoulder.
Right. It's like, hey, you tapped me out. Awesome. Okay, let's start again. Oh, you tapped me out again. I don't give a shit because I'm going to go home without injury other than some sore muscles.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And just finding that mentality within yourself where you're confident enough that you can train, but you're also confident enough to say, oh, this is too much.
Mm-hmm.
Need to back it off, partner, because I don't want to get injured. And I certainly do not have anything to prove today on this mat.
And that's the important part of, again, experience builds confidence, especially if you're surviving and creating resiliency. If you've already been there, done that. So you mentioned you've only competed 3 times. However, you were a law enforcement instructor. You were law enforcement in general. You spent so many years operational that you've been there, done that, despite not having been there, done that in the cage combative sport mentality. But you've been there, done that operationally. So the testament of experience has proven that you have nothing to prove. And on top of all that, you've hit that window of you've had to throw everything on the line. I would assume you're in your work as a law enforcement officer, that you've had to put it on the line. You've had to go to that extreme and beyond. And so you have that gauge as to, where it is up beyond the line. So you have that experience to test up to the line. And that comes, again, back to experience. And a lot of martial arts, because they're young in the martial arts, both physically, time-wise, and emotionally, they don't understand that you don't have to go 100% all the time. In the gym, you're not trying to kill your training partner. In the gym, it's not a fight. In the gym, check the ego. It's learning. So, and this is where experience, I often say fighting both competitive and real world, is that place where we can temper a lot of that ego and ratchet things back.
It was a old Van Damme movie, and it's when he goes, it's not the one where he goes to Thailand and fights, but it's another one similar to that. I can't remember what it was called. But anyway, it starts with Van Damme as an old man in a bar.
The Quest. It's The Quest.
The Quest. Yes.
I love that movie.
Yeah. And so, he's just like, oh, God, please don't come near me, kind of thing. Like, I don't need this shit in my life. Yep. and then he has to, and then he walks away, that's kind of where I am. It's like, please don't do that.
The Quest in my mind is the better version of Bloodsport, because Bloodsport's a bunch of bullshit. The Quest is actually trying to tell a legitimate story, and it's a beautiful story.
Yeah. It's you bring up the law enforcement again, and people say, well, if you're teaching fighting, have you ever been in a fight? It's like, that's important. Well, how do you test your stuff? Like, do you spar? Oh, we'll get into sparring versus scenario-based training in a minute.
Yeah.
It's like, I served in uniform on the street for 8 years of my police career. And I was counting, I was going back, I'm like, okay, well, how many bad guys did I arrest in 8 years? And I figure about 100 a year. So that's, that's like a lot of people.
There's a lot of contact.
800 people. And then thousands of other contacts that never led to arrest. Citations and whatever else. So tens of thousands of contacts on the street in unknown circumstances with potential violence erupting at any moment. 800 of those, we'll just say, were physical contact arrests at some level or another that also could have gone violent.
Yep.
Not once did I ever have to fight or get truly violent in order to contain the situation.
Yeah.
Because we use tactics,
Mm-hmm.
strategies, positioning, commands, tools, and most of the time a partner.
Principles.
You
It's
know,
fighting based on principles.
right. And so, you know, so I say, hey, I did this. I don't understand how this young person got in 16 fights, you know. I mean, he may have lived in an area that was, you know, unavoidable, but sometimes it's also just the ego and the, like, you know, like a puff in the chest and doing all this kind of stuff. And
Yep.
and so no, you don't have to have been in a whole bunch of street fights to understand how to control violence.
And also the street fights, the ego fights, creates this false sense of security and confidence, and it's very contextualized, just like competition sports are. It's not. I mean, there's skills and violent application, but it's not specific to tactics, because there is violence and then there's violence.
Yes.
And true violence, good violence, that's tactic based, that's military, that's law enforcement. That's where you have truly owned the battle space, and you're going to win because you have all these principles leading to an outcome dealing with a problem set. Versus, I'm just getting in a fight on the street, I'm getting a fight in a bar, I'm picking a fight because I'm a banger. It's just it's a different thing.
Yeah. I think it was, I don't know where it originally came from, but Tim Larkin uses, you know, social and asocial violence.
Yep.
And I watched a great video the other night of social violence where two young men got knocked out and both of them potentially could have died from head injuries when their head bounced off the cement.
Yep.
You know, just because two idiots were, you know, a couple of idiots were drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no. and you know, and then you get into the arrest process. Most of those were contained because they weren't combatives.
Yep.
You know, they weren't combative, violently combative. Some of them were asocial, violent people, long histories of prison time, gangbangers, drug users, you know, everything. But if you don't give them the opportunity, then, and you take that asocial violence out of the equation by controlling the environment, then you control them as well. And so that's decision making. We talked a little bit ago about, you know, your sterile training environment that most martial artists train in and never step out of the dojo to do anything. You know, go out to the parking lot, go out to the low lit area, go out in the snow, add weapons in, add multiple opponents in, you know, bring decision making into the process, bring escape and evasion into the process. Look at one of your guys. It was on Dean Franco's podcast the other day. They were talking about weapons of opportunity. You know, a door, a wall, a corner, an ashtray, a table. Those are all weapons if you know how to use them.
The wall has been my go-to for many occasions. So.
Yeah, I've used the ground because, you know, if you're not going to stand there with your hands behind your back, then you're going to the ground, and you know, it's very solid.
The planet's going to win. It's just
right. Yeah. Grass just beat your ass, you know.
So going back, we can go two ways. We can talk about sparring and scenario-based training, or we can talk about tactics, principles leading to outcomes. I mean, we can hit one or the other or both. It's just this is a natural segue to either one. I mean,
right. Well, let's do the educational part on it real quick because that will lead into more tactics and scenario base.
Okay.
So one of the things that's developing in the martial arts world with a lot of instructors is we're moving away from skills and drills only. And there's a contextual learning environment where it's goal-oriented, student-based, and you're bringing a lot of different context into it to say, okay, well, here's the scenario or here's what's happening. Find a solution. And so we were working on this at warrior strength.
Mm-hmm.
But we were working on it with the beginner class.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in a context on the mat in BJJ where I'm a beginner, and so I was like, we were given a task,
Mm-hmm.
get up off the ground and escape. My partner's task was to not let me get up off the ground and escape. So we were working without a skill set that helped us get up off the ground and escape in some cases. So it was difficult to achieve the goal. So we were talking about it, say, okay, well, at an advanced level, that's perfect. Just use all the skills that you know from your year or two of training or 10 years or whatever to get up off the ground and escape.
Yep.
You should be able to come up with multiple solutions to that problem. But if you don't have the core basic skills, at least a few of them, then you don't even know what decisions to make to resolve, to acquire a solution. And so we went back, okay, so there needs to be a combination then of this contextual student, outcome-based learning and skills and drills to make sure that you have the core skills and drills to solve these problems today. So I did it in one of my classes about a month ago. I said, okay, here's your starting point. You're slammed up against the wall. There's one hand on your throat and the other one's about to punch you in the face. Get out of there.
Fight and figure it out. I love that approach.
But they also had several weeks of the skills that gave them the ability and the selections to get out of that situation. So they were all successful. Whereas if I just took a brand new person in their second class or something and slammed them against the wall and choked them and said, get out of here, I'd be slamming, I'd be punching them in the face many times by the time you figure out what might work and what might not work. So there's got to be a nice blend and combination of that skills and drills combined with here's the scenario. Come up with your own solutions based on your own natural abilities, your body and your own mindset, and what you feel is going to work best for you, not what's going to work best for me. Now you have some things that feel natural to you. Now get really good at those.
Yep. Physical capability is a foundation leading to preferences, but you got to match that with tactics, which is the intellectual capability and the creativity side to synergistically adapt all that. So, and a lot of people the drills and skills are very focused on a physical A-B response.
Yes. Yeah. So I know a couple of the people listening have a school on the east side of Washington out here. And so I encourage you, I invite you, I welcome you to add some of this scenario stuff in. Take your students out to the parking lot, turn the lights off in the dojo, put on some really, crank up the rock and roll, get some really disgusting, disturbing audio tapes of babies crying and people screaming, that kind of stuff. Put a bag over their head to start with and pull the bag off and be attacked by multiple people. Get them grappling and then hand a knife to one of them. Just change it up and create these scenarios where they're not sterile anymore and people have to respond to new inputs. Or, come over and start kicking the guy on the top in the head lightly. But, okay, now there's a second opponent. What are you going to do? You haven't contained the guy on the ground yet. He's not injured. So as soon as you go to contain the guy and stop the guy from kicking you in the head, he's going to start punching you in the head. So can you can you injure him to prevent him from continuing so you can deal with number two? What choices are available in that? How are you going to win in this scenario? Or are you going to win in this scenario?
Because that's another thing that people have in that internal narrative of I am going to survive. Now, the other part about from a criminal mentality and from an apex predator mentality is they never see themselves losing. The only outcome they ever see is them winning, which from a owning of the battle space mentality for both law enforcement and military and executive protection is I will win. because there's no other outcome. I have to. But for the 80%, the martial artists, they don't contextualize of, they say in self-defense that I will survive, but there's that mental shift of I will win because I will make it home. That's, again, it's that internal mentality, that internal art that a lot of people just don't develop because they get so fixated on the physical skills and they lack the intellectual skills because it's never been taught to them, or they don't think that way.
Yeah. The mindset training is really important. And the decision making, it's decision making that is missing in a lot of training. If you're sparring one person in a ring under particular rules, you make decisions on how you're going to block, deflect, and counter. That type of thing. And that's great. It's amazing training. We all need that, et cetera, et cetera. But now you're in a street environment. You have three unknown individuals who have kind of cornered you in a not well-lit area. And they want your wallet and your car keys. Okay.
Yep.
If that's all they want, then you give it to them.
Yep.
But you have to practice that. You have to practice maintaining your emotional response and not go into fear, because then you're going to go into freeze or forget. And then you're not going to do anything. Right.
Yep.
So if you go into fight or flight, that's great, but you have to know how to fight or flight. Like there was a good example I saw a couple of weeks ago. This guy, we were talking about this in a self-defense context with a very skilled martial artist. And he said, okay, I'm going to attack you, defend yourself, and then escape, because our ultimate goal in self-defense is escape. That's the difference right there. Your ultimate goal in a martial arts contest and sparring is win. Yep. In self-defense, it's escape. In law enforcement and military, it's control and win. So we have a different outcome. I don't care if I win in a self-defense situation, as long as I can get away from the person. That's my win.
Living is winning.
Winning.
Yeah, living is winning.
Yes. So he attacked him. He defended him stuff. He had good skills and everything. And then he stood there. And he said, no, you need to escape now. So he backpedaled up in his little shuffle stance, in his fighting stance, like he would doing a three-step sparring thing in class. He said, no, you need to get the hell out of here. Turn and run. But if you don't train that turn and run, you're not going to train and run in a real life situation either. Yep. So when we're doing, some scenario things and say, okay, A is going to attack B, B, your task is to neutralize A and leave the environment. I have them run out the door into the parking lot. Yep. But even that type of simple thing, if you don't train it, you won't do it.
I mean, we did fire drills as children. It's you prefer to do the things that you practice. So you have to practice it. And if you only practice up to a certain degree, that's all the outcome you're going to get.
Yeah. Because your brain works in a predictive nature. If you've never given your brain the predictions to make, then you can't make those decisions to take the actions. Yep. So we can go back to the old OODA loop. I like it. A lot of guys don't like it. I like it. But there's a P that's missing in the OODA loop, and that's predictions. Yes. So our brain predicts at a subconscious level faster than we can make decisions. So it's already deciding and making decisions and stuff, but it also has to have that information previously to make those predictions. That's why the military trains in the environment similar to where they're going to, and all this kind of stuff, and push you to your limits so that your brain will still function when you're exhausted and hungry and you need to take a shit, and and all these things, so that you keep on fighting instead of getting distracted. And so in the OODA loop, for those who may not know it, you have your observations. Well, your observations are all of your senses combining together to bring you to a context of what is in your environment. And then you have your orientation, and this is where some of the prediction comes in too, is if you've never seen it, heard it, thought it, watched it on video or anything, you're going to get stuck trying to orient yourself to it.
Yep.
So we see people standing in the middle of a mall where there's an active shooter doing this in videos all the time. They're standing there going like, what
do
are
I
those
do?
loud noises?
Yeah.
What should I do now? And they don't do anything because they have no orientation to loud gunshots and moving to cover and a safe place while dragging your children or pushing your children in front of you along too.
Mhm.
And so if they've never done that before, they might eventually figure it out if they're lucky enough to have time,
Mhm.
but they may not have time.
Mhm.
So they get stuck in what I call an uh-oh moment.
Mhm.
You've got your observations, you're uh-oh, now what? Well, that also happens in a one-on-one. You get some guy, he pushes you on the chest and he goes like this. If you're standing there going, uh-oh, your head just hit the pavement.
That's what I call getting fucked.
Right, exactly. And so you never get to the duh, which is your decision and your action.
Mhm.
And so if you can't like, what am I going to do? You're screwed, you're out of luck.
That's
And
failure beyond your control. Or, I mean, you can control, but I switch it back and forth between fucked and failure beyond your control because there's no way you can ninja star your way through a meteor.
No.
But if you fail to make a decision, that's your failure. So
yeah. And if you don't train it, if you don't look at it, if you don't previously think about it, you don't even have decisions to make.
that is correct.
That's why young drivers get in more crashes.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're driving fast and doing stupid things, but a lot of times it's just that their brain can't make the decision to turn the wheel and hit the brake fast enough to avoid the crash. Whereas an older seasoned driver who has seen that more and experienced it more and has more visual context of how far that is and how fast I'm driving and how long it's going to take for me to get there and everything can make those decisions faster and avoid the crash. Whereas the young driver can't.
Yep.
Yeah.
And part of that perception phase is, I keep going back to it, but principles. We live in a world based upon principles because we live in a physical world constrained by physics. So fighting, the goal, the problem set is I'm in a fight. The outcome set is I want to survive, win, defeat. So what are the principles that unite across the board to get to that point of that positive outcome? And again, principles unite everything because the body only moves a certain amount of ways. We're constrained to gravity. The list goes on. But people get so fixated on the intellectual and the physical techniques that they fail to make a decision. They get in that uh-oh phase because, one, they don't have the experience enough. Two, there's too much data for them to process through. And three, they have too many tools instead of going back to the stuff that they've trained previously consistently and create those preferences to lead to those outcomes.
Yeah.
So
I think that that last point is important too. I'll set up a drill for my students and say, okay, we're going to go off a left jab and a right cross for lack of anything else right now. Say, here's three options. You move to the inside, you move to the outside, you move to the outside and take their back. Or you move to the outside and here's three counter strikes that will at least slow the person down, create disruption in them. So you have an extra moment to think so that they're not immediately countering you. So you create those gaps so that you can then eventually, hopefully quickly, gain control over the situation. But you have to do your distractions and your interruptions most of the time in order to get to that point.
Yep.
So I'll say, here's three options of entries. Here's three options of counters. Figure out which ones of those work best for you and get really good at that.
Yes.
Don't try to put all 9, 3 times 3 is 9 different options. Don't try to select from all 9 different options under duress and under stress. Have maybe 2 of those 9 and then make a decision on what's going to work. And don't think about it too much. Just let your body do it after you get to a certain point of training.
Yeah, because this is going back to martial arts. Martial arts is a lifelong endeavor of mastery and proficiency leading to mastery. It is consistently changing as the body goes through different changes. But the goal is that mastery of the gestalt approach to things. versus combatives. Combat and warfare is about proficiency and immediacy. This is where like talking about defensive tactics and combat skill sets, particularly to battle drills, they eliminate a lot of the esoteric lots of tools to be used, and they get really good at 10 things, because in a stressful environment, if you can go through 10 things versus 1,000, I mean, just by numbers and volume, you have a better outcome numerically to come out with a fight that might work for you. And on top of all that, combat efficiency and proficiency comes at a very small time frame of lead up, train up, and execution, versus the martial artists as their entire life to prepare for something that may never happen, but they spend the entire life doing that to become masters of themselves within the context and framework of the style and discipline that they're going for.
Yeah. It's really, I like separating them and then bringing them back together.
Yes.
And so through my career, that's what's happened. Like I said earlier, now I'm at just, I maintain, I learn, but my focus is making sure that I can still do this for another 20 years.
Yes.
So I may go watch a couple of young, kids banging it out in the ring at Belton's, but I'm probably not going to step in the ring.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
The problem that I run into is like my brain wants to go because it's playtime for me, but my body and my brain says, no, you can't do that, because that's what led you to this problem in the first place. Right. So it's a matter of control. And like in the case where I'm at in my martial arts, going back to the backyard as I started, it's about play, it's about questions, because I don't teach necessarily anymore, not publicly, and my approach isn't about teaching. I'm about asking questions, about challenging my own internal dialogue, my internal rhetoric and dogma, to see if I can learn something new, and to see what if my preferences are actually just based in bias when there's something better based within principles. And this is where my stepping into the growth of training Balintawak has been, and also stepping into NSI and participating in Water and Steel and going through that mindset, where there's a lot of physical association and mindset association, but it's a different approach, and seeing that I can override my preferences and do something new and interesting.
Yeah. I did that, 13 years ago now. Well, I'll jump back to the 90s just quickly. And this will bring up, I don't know, how many people are online?
There is about 11, is what I'm counting.
Okay. So this may spark some people. People may not know what I'm talking about, but I'll use the word Sistema.
Yeah.
So back in the 90s, Vladimir Vasilyev moved to Toronto just after Perestroika. That's where he found his new home, and opened his Sistema school in Toronto, just up the street from the police college.
Yep.
And so we invited him down to the police college one day to come and train and see what he was doing, because some of the police officers had gone to his school, and they said, wow, this is some really different, pretty cool shit. And so I went to this workshop, and we did some bladed stuff, and we did some gun takeaways, and it was some pretty cool shit.
Kind of how Krav Maga used to be.
Yeah. Well, I looked at it for a bit, and then I stayed with my other path. About 12 years ago, I was like, okay, what else do I need here? What else can I incorporate? What can I do? And so I bought a couple of his videos, DVDs, and started watching them, and said, the same as I had said 20 years before, I said, this is some pretty cool shit.
Yeah. And
so I bought about 15 of his DVDs, went to a couple of workshops with Martin Wheeler, who's one of his top instructors in that system of Sistema. Connected with Kevin Sikora out of Montreal, who had been with Vladimir for about 10 years and then created Combat Sistema. And brought his kind of Japanese, much more curriculum-based approach back into his Sistema, because in Sistema, it's much more free open. There's no real set curriculum. There's not a lot of drills and skills. It's more about movement, principles, and concepts.
Mm-hmm.
But what the Systema helped me really do with all of the other stuff that I had been doing was smooth it out,
Mm-hmm.
make it more efficient, make it more proficient, make my body more resilient and much freer. And so that gave me the ability to use what I already knew at a much higher level
Yep.
of relaxation, understanding structure alignment, and all of those things. So I like Systema for those
Mm-hmm.
reasons. And I think a lot of guys turn it off because there's a bunch of videos that came out in the last several years that,
Oh, the
frankly,
flapping. Yeah. Yeah.
are a bunch of shit. But there's some of the earlier ones that are really good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of other teachers still in Russia and other parts of the world that are really good.
Yeah. I mean, the core of it is, do you like it? Does it make you happy? Do you find value in it? And your journey, your process is your own, because at the end of all things, it's about you, not the comparative association valuation of another person. Because this goes back to that giving yourself permission, just like you're the athlete that you spoke about earlier. When you're giving yourself the permission to go do new things because you want to and you find it interesting, and not be constrained based upon the perception of it being silly, because you can love what you love. And how dare somebody else say that you can't? Because as a free, liberty-minded individual, you're allowed to do what you love.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's martial arts is an interesting world, because I know you've talked about it in some of your other podcasts, loyalty, staying with our system, and this style is this and that style is that, and all that kind of stuff, which I in rank, all of those topics, I have no rank in anything.
Yeah.
I couldn't care less about rank, never did. I got my black belt in my first system, and then 3 others when I was young, 25, 30 years ago.
If you're still doing it, great. If you're not, then what's the point? Yeah.
Right. And I don't belong to federations, associations, political organizations, or anything. And so if again, feel free to be yourself and express your martial arts as you choose to develop them, and learn from whoever you can, wherever you can, whenever you can, but don't get stuck and pigeonholed into having to do certain things because this teacher said that or that teacher said this.
I equate it to the idea of driving in the mirror, because like all the things that you used to do that are constraining you are in that small little rear view mirror, and you may have a backseat driver that's your inner monologue, that loyalty saying you have to do this. But the fact is, you have to be present enough to know where you're going, and that windshield is so much bigger. There's a bigger field of view, and you're moving forward. And people get so stuck about living in the past, whether it's military or martial arts. They get so stuck about that. And it's, what are you doing now? And what are you moving toward? And this is where, like, in the regard of what I'm doing now is, I don't know what I'm doing necessarily moving forward, but I'm discovering it. I'm like driving in that Idlewild, just enjoying the scene, enjoying the view of I'm just going to go do stuff. And it makes me happy because I'm not constrained by the guy in the back seat or the life in the rearview mirror. Thus, with like Water and Steel was such a beautiful thing for me. I mean, it was stressful because I had a lot of buildup to it, a lot of internal buildup for it, but experiencing it, and this is where I met you, experiencing it was very freeing. And I really just enjoyed my time there. So I'm looking forward to going back next year.
Yeah. I really like Kelly Warden's approach.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of years and a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. And at the same time, he's really open.
Yeah, he is.
And he'll, and he's admitted this several times. If I try something and it doesn't work and someone else shows me something else, well, I'll do it that way,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I run into this thing about like adding to the collective, because I mean I don't want to bring more technician based stuff. I don't want to bring more because I mean we all do the same stuff to a point. My approach at this point in my life is a little different, as is with everybody else. But like in the context of my background, specifically like presenting criminal creativity, because we have martial arts creativity, we have that problem solving set, but understanding in the context of self-defense and personal protection, what is the creativity and mindset of a criminal's base? Because our approach to training is standardized based upon the context of the uniform that I'm wearing, or whether it's a dojo uniform or a police uniform or a military uniform. Our problem set and expression is focused on that. But what about the enemy? What is their creative approach to the same problem set of combative situation? How do I win? And that's what I hope to express when I'm adding things to the overall conversation.
Yeah, and being able to read the scenario you were talking about, the criminal mindset. There's several different types of criminals, but you have your opportunity criminal dudes, and you have your predator criminal dudes, and how you have to deal with those is can be quite different.
Yep.
I was working security at a university, and these guys rode in on motorcycles, and I knew they didn't go to the university because it was a small private one. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go over and see who they are. As I was walking up, I took down all the license plates of the bikes and stuff and put my notebook away.
Yep.
As they're coming toward me, they split. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I'm going to be a really super nice guy and just say please and thank you guys if you don't mind.
Yep.
And that's how I approached it, and they really appreciate it. And they came back together, got on their motorcycles, and rode off.
Because
they rode off, their vests and their jacket open, and I saw they were all armed.
Yep.
So it was like, oh, that could have been a shit show because I wasn't.
Right. And again, that's the like mindset of reading the situation and going through the different processes of who I'm going to be with these people.
Right.
Because of the young, egotistical, testosterone-ridden 20-something-year-old with his jackboots bloused. I mean, that's a great way to die versus age and experience and predictable outcomes because of age and experience. It goes back to that metaphor of be wary of the graybeard upon the field, littered by the bodies of young men.
Right. Yeah. And I like the reverse of that. Beware of the old man in a profession where young men die young.
Yeah. That is correct. And this is where the beauty of podcasts like this is we actually get to talk about process and experiences and actually have this time to talk to the next generation, because really we're documenting for the next generation moving forward. Because again, to break away from dogma and rhetoric, because stagnation is death, is we have to have hard conversations. We have to have conversations in general to see and document this stuff so we know this is the thought of what was, and this is what we're trying to accomplish. Because podcasts give us an opportunity to actually talk through stuff so we can hand down this experiential knowledge, just like a fireside chat with the tribe. I mean, this is the modern version of it. And I'm very grateful for anybody who comes on here and is willing to be genuine, vulnerable, and share their knowledge and experience with me. So again, thank you.
Yeah. No, this is fun. This is my first podcast.
That's awesome. You're doing great.
So hopefully I'll get maybe some other podcasters will say, hey, let's bring him on too.
Yeah. I'm always happy to bring people on for repeat guests as well, because I would love in the long run, I would love to have like discussions between podcasters so we can actually, like, I hate to say challenge the ideas, but literally you're challenging ideas just to see where the commonalities are and proving that you can have a conversation and disagreements and still have a positive outcome.
Right.
And that we're all learning. So that is my end state with having a candid conversation between people.
Well, that's one of the things I really appreciate with most of the people I've known over the years in martial arts is, oh man, I don't like that one. Show me something else, or Yeah, I can understand that. Well, let's work on it. Let's develop it. Why don't you like it? And just having those conversations
Yep.
and that open-mindedness. And if you can find that in your martial arts career or in every aspect of your life, then then you're fortunate.
That's awesome. I think that's actually a great spot for us to close out on because
Okay.
it's beautiful. Doug, thank you for being on here with me and spending so much time and the gift of your time. I know there's some things that we didn't get to, but I'm more than happy to bring you on for part 2. Do you have anything that you want to put out for us for presentation and promotion that's coming up with you?
If you're in the Seattle, Kirkland, Bellevue area, I teach classes here. I have a school in Duvall. I just put out the Protect You programs. They're up on the website now. You can see the little logo there, the little gray man with his sword. And those programs are available to any organization, church, group, family. Work on 3 to 4 hour presentations on a variety of information from mindset and situational awareness up to dealing with armed threats and active shooter, that type of thing. So take a look at my website, www.eastsidecombatives.com. We have a web page under that. On Facebook, I'm under Doug Raven. And yeah.
Pull up that website here. Here we are. Let's go.
Yeah, and if you can't tell, I love conversations. I love teaching. I love sharing. I love discussions and saying, well, this is why, this is why, or this is why not, and all that kind of stuff. So that page has the kids and adult info and everything. If you're interested in seminars, there's one at the top. You can just go across the top bar and find it, see my bio and stuff there as well.
Awesome. Well, sir, I'm going to say our goodbyes and thank you so much for spending again this time with us. And I will talk to you soon when we're dropping down into our outro. Thank you.
Have a good one, Kurt. Good.
All right. Well, people, that was awesome. I'm very grateful for everybody spending an hour and a half with us doing a nooner. And yeah, very grateful again with Doug coming on and sharing his process, his stories, and just the gift of his time. Again, anybody, if you want to be a guest on here, just let me or Brian know, and we'll definitely make it happen. I'm all for having interesting conversations with cool people. So yeah, definitely share it out. And have a wonderful day. And let's do this outro.